Good. There we go.
Yay.
Right. Good evening, everybody. We're just coming to the group now. I know there's been quite a bit of interest for our conversation this evening. I'm just going to mute while I have a quick cough. 1 second, everybody. Sorry, Holly. I'm getting over man flu, but I'm soldiering on.
I might have to do the same, so don't worry about it.
I'll try and mute myself if I have to cough. But good. Well, hi, everybody. Say hi as you come on in. And we've got a... Well, it's great to see you, Holly. For those who don't know Holly, Holly is a clinical animal behaviourist, but also a clinical psychologist from human side of things. So it's a great combination, I think, and especially to look at this topic, Holly, which is basically around anticipatory grief. Really, it's about that side of things, and something that my husband and I are going through a little bit at the moment, and I know there's a lot of people that resonate. So hi, Craig. Hi, Ingrid. Hi, Emma. Oh, they're all coming in. Great to see you this evening. So Holly, is there anything you just wanted to share with the group a little bit about you and what you've, what you do before we get into things?
Yeah, sure. My company is Paws Up Dogs, and we mainly focus on trauma-informed working. So we work with dog guardians and also dog professionals to try and help everyone to do whatever it is that they do with dogs, live with them, work with them, whatever, in a trauma-informed way. So I guess what that means is we are going in and trying to make it feel as safe emotionally for everyone as possible, for the dog, for the caregivers, and for any professional that you might be working with as well, so that you can actually make some positive change and things start to feel emotionally a little bit better. So that's kind of the mainstay of what we do.
It's so important, isn't it? Because I think, what's interesting more generally before we come on to the topic is there's been a big shift, isn't there, in focus on recognizing the individual's emotional lived experience, whether that's the dog or the human, the caregiver. And I find that it's caregivers who really get this stuff because they live that. They live their own life, of course, with all the judgments and expectations that fly around us, and all the kind of masks that we wear to try and fit in and try and fulfill the judgments and expectations, and also they live those lives with their dogs. They see their dog, how it struggles. They see the dog, how that dog is different in different contexts. But I think a lot of the more traditional narratives around dogs stops them from connecting in that way. So I think having this kind of approach that you offer is really important for both ends of the leash, and especially the trauma-informed side of things, because, of course, one of the most foundational things about a trauma-informed approach, one of the most important things is to not add more trauma. And that's something that doesn't get talked about actually enough, I think, when we think about having a trauma-informed approach with dogs. So if we're going to be thinking about that, we have to be better at trying to be more available to that lived experience, So I think it's really great what you're doing, and this is a topic that you really felt wanted to go over, because I don't think it gets talked about enough, and I know when I put it in the group, it really resonated for a lot of people, because I think we've all experienced this or are experiencing it. Just so people know, we've got a spammer. Sorry, I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm just going to delete that. Sorry,
the joys
everybody.
of live internet.
Yeah, it is. Delete. Right, sorry about that, everybody. It's a good job I'm keeping an eye on it. So there's a lot of people. We've got Arthur, who's our older dog. We had a diagnosis for mouth cancer recently, and just trying to decide how we're going to move forwards with things. But I think especially when your dog gets to a certain age, you start to think about a time when they might not be here, and the things that come along. But I'll let you start then, Holly. Where's the best place for us to start with approaching quite a delicate topic, really?
I suppose that's probably the best place to start, is just to kind of acknowledge that this is a really sensitive topic for lots of us, myself included, you too, Andy, and for whoever may be listening. So just kind of keep that in mind as you listen, and decide whether you listen to everything now, whether you come back, and just kind of the place that you're in, because we sometimes get taken by surprise by our emotions, I think. And there's nothing wrong with showing emotion, of course, but sometimes It can feel a little bit too much. So if you need to step away, step away. But I suppose it might be helpful just to define what we mean by anticipatory grief to start with. So this might be something that you have experienced or are experiencing with an animal. You may also have experienced it with a human. It's also not always necessarily related to death or dying. It can be the loss of something else, like a relationship or a home or anything at all, really. But what we're essentially thinking when we're thinking about it in relation to dogs is, like you said, a dog that's maybe older or has some significant health conditions, and we start to almost grieve the loss of them before they've even passed. And in some cases, this can go on for a really long time. So if you have a dog that's unwell or older for a long time, which hopefully some of them are older for a long time, it can take years, and people start to feel really upset because they're thinking, I'm not making the most of the time I have with my dog because I'm spending all of my time getting so upset about how I'll feel when they're gone. And that can be really intense, I think, for us, because we then start feeling guilty. Oh, I should be, doing all these wonderful things with him, but all I'm doing is sitting, staring at him, feeling terrible about what's going to come in the future. So there's lots of big feelings associated with this stuff, I think, which is why I think it's important to talk about it.
Yeah, and also I think it's important what you said about it isn't necessarily about the loss of a loved one. It can be about other things that happen. There is a tell us a little bit about the psychology behind it. Why our brain allows us to enter into that state? What is there a preparatory element to it? Is that part of it that we're getting into?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different depending on what kind of person you are and how you generally approach adversity and things going wrong in life. But certainly, one school of thought is that we are trying to prepare ourselves, and almost because it's not voluntary. Most of us don't want to feel like this. It sort of takes over a little bit, and you find it filling your mind. And it can be the brain's way of essentially trying to keep us safe. So if we go through this now, maybe it won't be so bad when it really happens. That's often what might be going on for people. Now, of course, anyone that's ever lost someone over time knows that that's not the case. Unfortunately, that grieving process will still happen. It can be slightly less if you've already partially gone through it, but it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. And it's hard for people because it's hard to have those conversations, because when an animal or a human is passed, other people are able to relate to that. So they can come in with the sympathy and the empathy, and they can come to the funeral, or they can do all the normal things that we do when someone's mourning and grieving. But when that animal or that human hasn't yet left us, it's harder for people to understand. They're like, well, I know you're upset. Of course you are, but not yet. I need to save some of my energy to look after you when it actually happens. So it can feel quite lonely for people, I think, because it's almost a bit of a taboo to talk about it, as if we're kind of egging it on a little bit, which of course we're not. It's a totally normal process. So yeah, kind of preparatory thinking is one way of looking at it. The other way is that this is huge anxiety, right? So we are so worried and so anxious about when that day finally comes, when we lose that animal or that person. We don't necessarily know if we're going to be able to get through that, how we're going to be able to cope with that. And so that huge anxiety has to go somewhere, and it can be centered here in starting to grieve for them before they've already gone.
Yeah, it's got a few things there just to kind of look at the individual points, because they're quite strong ones, I think. And the first one is this thing about the taboo element of this. Even us having this conversation tonight, I think, is going to be really helpful. And I know even with my husband, so my husband works in end of life for humans. So I know that I can talk about my thoughts about Arthur very openly, but I still find it hard to. And I think even in relationships, the caregivers around that dog, they're all probably feeling something similarly, but are finding it hard to communicate that to each other. And then also you've got the risk then of somebody who isn't ready to talk about it, even though they're thinking it and having the anxiety of it, they're not ready to verbalize it. It creates frictions and tensions around that.
Absolutely. And don't forget as well, there's also the people in your life for whom dogs are not as important as they are to you. So this could be colleagues, friends, family members, even people in your home. You might have an incredible bond and relationship with your dog, and maybe your partner or your child, they like them, but it's not to the same level. So then that becomes really hard if you do reach out and talk to someone and they're like, it's just a dog. I mean, that's the worst thing to hear, right? So there's that societal thing as well that kind of gets in the way for us, I think, too, which isn't there as much for people as it is for animals, for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. So the other thing is as well about the real swelling of anxiety, the having thoughts about a future when you're not going to have that companion. How intrusive can those thoughts get for some people, and how does that anxiety manifest for some?
Yeah, so I think it manifests in the way that any type of anxiety can manifest. So it can be incredibly intrusive. So it could be that you're lying in bed at night having these thoughts, having images. That's something I've experienced myself with my own dog, having an image of being in the veterinary office, having them put to sleep, even though it hasn't happened yet, for example. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, brain, could you not? Like, I don't want to see that. But it's what's being conjured in your mind. You know how sometimes we play out conversations before they happen, and often we do that in a planning way. Like if you have to have a difficult conversation with someone or something, you might kind of practice it a bit in your mind. That's deliberate and that's conscious. We're doing that deliberately. But often these things start to happen when we don't intend to do them. So it might be that you imagine the day after the dog has passed, for example, having a conversation with a partner or a friend and what kind of things you would say. And it can feel very alien because it almost feels like we're playing a role or acting a part, like something that we would see in a film or something. And then that can feel quite difficult. But that's not what's happening. It's just that your brain is trying to make sense of these really strong feelings that you're having, even though the event hasn't happened. And so it puts it onto the situation as if it has happened. And that's why we see all these strong images, have these conversations and stuff like that. So it can make you feel a little bit odd and not quite like yourself. And of course, that adds to the difficult feelings you're already having. So just knowing that this stuff is normal, I think can be quite helpful because you can give yourself a bit of a break when it does happen.
And if you think about the measures we can take, I think even just us talking about this is really helpful because there's going to be people listening who are going to be, okay, that's what I've been experiencing or that's what I have experienced, and it must be pretty normal then because other people are talking about it. I think that's the normalization of it can be hugely helpful.
Yeah.
But also the practical side of things, because our brains are the brain likes to predict outcomes. So it likes to know one. And when there isn't a clear one, it can create multiple outcomes. And that's that ruminating side of things, isn't it? We're just going through all these different things. What are some good strategies for us then to try and compensate for some of these kind of feelings and thoughts that come along when we're experiencing that anticipatory grief?
So I think the first one, I always bang on about this when it comes to anything to do with any type of anxiety or deep feeling, but it's allowing yourself a little bit of time and space to feel how you're feeling. You do not need to wait to grieve because you are not just grieving the loss of that animal, but you are grieving so much more than that. You're grieving your life with them. So in the same way as when you break up with a romantic partner and it feels all consuming because it's not just the loss of that person, but it's the loss of the perceived future. Or we were going to move here, we were going to go on these trips, we were going to have this dog, and we were going to, whatever you wanted to do with that person, now all of that is gone. And you're thinking, oh, I don't really know what to do now. And it's the same with anticipatory grief because you have a life with that dog. Maybe you share cuddles on the sofa or walks together or play, or you do a sport together, or you just love having their company. They lie on your bed at night. And so all of that is being lost as well as that soul and that being. So that's a big deal. That is a massive deal. So actually allowing yourself some time to feel how you're feeling, to allow yourself to grieve in anticipation is okay and actually to be encouraged. Because when we try and shut down our feelings, when we try and not feel them and just say, no, not right now, that's for later, it just bubbles up and bubbles up. And that's when some of those intense kind of images and conversations and thoughts become even more intense often, because our brain is saying, no, I need to feel this stuff. And we're saying, not now. Now, of course, there will always be times in life where we can't right now. I'm on a Zoom call at work and it will be really hard for me if I break down. I need to just compartmentalize this for a second. But then once we're done with whatever it is, just allow yourself a little bit of time. Then if you need to cry, shout, punch a cushion, whatever it is you need to do, I think that's really important as a starting point for sure.
I think that's really important, isn't it? I think it's okay to feel those things is a really important message, and allow ourselves to sit with those feelings, and also to allow ourselves, if we feel we can, to communicate those to those we trust enough to communicate those with, and not expecting anything back. I think that's very important, because the whole point of being a bit vulnerable and communicating how we feel is just about communicating how we feel. We shouldn't expect anything back from that, but it can be very helpful. I know we have the 3 C's. I talked about this before, but control is the first one, that because like I said, we like to control outcome. The brain likes to have that, and then things come along in life where you think, oh, I can't control that outcome, and especially the thought of loss, and then we have the next C, which is change. So we want to try and change something, but we can't, and we can get stuck in that kind of thought process of change. But the final C is choice, and this is an important one. And I spoke to my husband actually earlier, because I said we were talking today just to hear some things that he might say from what they talk about at the hospice and that, because obviously they have a lot of things there with people that are looking ahead and having that anticipatory grief, and this is where the choice comes in, because we do have a choice actually around some of the things that we can focus in on, some of the things that we can do, utilizing some of that preparatory time that we're given. Because of course, if sadly, if we lose a loved one just like that with no thought of them, and it's an absolute shock, then you don't obviously have the preparatory element that comes with it. And some of the things he was talking about was the importance of using time to be able to plan ahead, and just think, okay, so what does this look like? What is the diagnosis? What is the general thing am I looking at with my dog who's now a bit older? What does that look like? And also to look into what actual end of life means. And I think this is something that I've spoken to with Emily Nightingale, the vet, before, and other vet colleagues of mine who are really interested in end of life, and how we can do it better. But I think there's a lot of caregivers who don't know what it's going to necessarily look like, and I think it's finding ways when you feel strong enough to ask those questions, because again, that's giving some surety down the line. So this is part of the preparing. But the big one that Kieran told me, which I think was a really important one, is once you can find that time to do the preparatory stuff and think, okay, what does this look like? What does that look like? Okay, I can see that. Then plan the day-to-day. Really live the day-to-day, because we can, if we don't do the planning of the bigger stuff, we lose the ability sometimes to just enjoy the day-to-day.
Absolutely, because your anxiety takes over the day-to-day. And that's when you feel like you can't even spend any quality time, because you're so busy worrying about the uncertain future. So definitely, and what goes hand in hand with that is that's kind of more practical planning, but also emotional planning for the grief process. So what does the grief process look like? What stages do most people go through when they grieve? And we've got the kind of stages that, as far as we know, most people go through. So denial, anger, bargaining, which is kind of where we say, oh, if I could just do this, then it would be okay. Or if I could just do this, and we start kind of bargaining with ourselves or with some higher being or whatever it is you believe in. Depression, which can last a really long time. And finally, acceptance. And when we get to that acceptance point, it's not that we don't care anymore. It's not that we've forgotten. It's just that we're able to make some kind of peace within ourselves about what's happened and that loss. We think most people go through those stages. Some people are in some stages for longer than others. Some people cycle them a couple of times, but at least knowing that that's what we should expect and that's how we might be feeling right now, it gives us that preparation, it gives us that certainty, and it gives us a sense of control. So like you said, we can then be like, right, what's my dog's bucket list? What would they love to do in this last month or 6 months? I saw a wonderful video the other day on TikTok, and they'd taken a dog from a shelter who was like 19 and a half years old, really sick, not long to go. He ended up living an entire other year, and they ticked off like 50 things that he absolutely loved. And I was like, that's amazing. But they were able to do that because I don't know them personally, but presumably they'd done some preparation and they knew, you know what, we're adopting this dog now. We don't know how long we've got, but let's try and get the most out of the time that we have.
I love that. I think that's one of the powerful things, isn't it? Because also I what you say there about the different stages of grief and recognizing that we all likely to go through those as part of anticipatory grief, you know, because the bargaining one is a big one for me, because I remember with my late mother, and she had a end of life diagnosis, and I went through a lot of bargaining stuff with all sorts of ways actually, so actually then listening to you talking about some of these things then, one of the things to bear in mind, especially with our dogs, we don't have this with our human loved ones, but it's the one thing we can gift. There is one gift we have, is to be able to have a managed end of life for our dogs, you know, and I guess this is something that, knowing that that's coming, whether it's an old age thing and I think as soon as, you know, with the normal way of things, as soon as we take on a companion animal, in the great scheme of things, there's a good chance we're going to outlive them. I think it's it's one of the hardest bits, of course, of our time with them. My late father had a little saying, is that everything comes at a price, and I think that depth of love comes at the biggest price when you think about the loss. But I think that what I'm hearing from you is actually this time that it is a gift in a way, that we have the chance to be able to do some of the preparatory stuff, think about the preparatory stuff for our own emotions, as you say. I think one thing we know is it's going to hurt, and it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging. And I think if we know that, rather than know that internally and just not address it, if it gives us a chance to find where that good support network might be, think about what we need to put in place. These are positives, I think, from a very difficult process.
Absolutely. And the other benefit of dogs over humans in this case is that, at least not until the very end, the dog doesn't know what's going to happen. So when you're with a human, you've got to deal with that as well, because they've got their own anticipatory grief going on. They're thinking, gosh, how many days, weeks, months, and all of that. And some of you that have experienced that with loved ones who are humans will know how that feels. With a dog, that is a gift, that they're not feeling that, then they don't have that knowledge. So we can be like, hey buddy, we're going to the beach today, and they're like, yeah, and you see the tail go, because even though you're feeling it and it's like, oh, this is heavy for me, then not. And so we can really derive joy from the fact that they're still themselves. You know, when you see an elderly dog doing something really puppy, like a real puppy play bow, or they chase after a ball or something, you're just like, that is adorable. That's the kind of thing that we can really enjoy, which I think is really important. One other thing I just wanted to touch upon, it's a little bit of a backtrack, but it's just sprung into my mind, so I think it's quite important, is just to remember that whenever we lose anyone, it reminds us of all of our previous losses. And I think this is especially significant for people with dogs, because like you said, we will normally outlive our animals. And so you may have had many dogs that you've lost before, or cats or horses or whatever. And so the thought of losing and then actually losing this dog is going to bring all of that back as well. And that's, again, incredibly normal. But just to be prepared for that too, you might start thinking about that dog or that cat along with yours, and just to be a bit prepared for that, I think, is important as well.
And one thing that a bit of advice I was given when my father died about my mother, A friend said to me, "Don't be strong for your mother." And that was really good advice, because I think I would have been, because my mother wanted to be my mother, and to see me be upset and to console me. And I think that was something I think we need to think about when we have supportive family dynamics, and you have those kind of secure family attachments and dynamics, is we can think, oh, well, I can't show that I'm not coping because I need to be strong for my partner or my wife or my husband or my children. But I think that it's healthy to just be able to show how you feel, and then let others soothe you as much as you want to soothe others.
Yeah. If it's someone that's experiencing it to a similar depth that you are, there's real companionship in that. I think you don't have to have a deep and meaningful conversation about your feelings if that is really hard for you, but you can just sit in companionable silence with someone else. Or you can, like my friend and I did recently, put David Attenborough on and just sit next to someone on the sofa and just know that they're there because they love you and care about you, even if you're not ready to talk about it. So there's levels to this stuff. If you are able to talk about it, fantastic, and have someone listen. But if you're not there just yet, there's no need to hide yourself away the whole time. You can still get that support from someone. Like, I find it hard to talk about my emotions sometimes, but I'll say to my best friend, can we just have like a sofa night, because I don't want to be on my own, but I don't really want to talk about it. And she'll be like, yeah, great. So you can adjust this to what fits you, and your needs may change over time as well. So that's okay as well. Just do what you need in the moment, I think, whenever we're dealing with any kind of grief.
Yeah. So I'd like to open it up to the people in the room. If anybody would like to ask any questions for Holly or share some things, and I'll just give you a moment to think about that and put that in the group if you do. Just to finish off then, Holly, we've covered quite a bit anyway, I think, but what are the things that the things that you'd like to kind of summarize around anticipatory grief, and what it offers actually, but also other things that we can do ourselves to help us navigate it? Because I don't think anything makes it easier about it, but there are things that can help us to navigate through.
Yeah. So I think one thing we haven't touched upon is that the anxiety and also the low mood that can come with this. So we've spoken about feeling anxious and worried, which is very normal, but actually you can feel incredibly low, depressed, and all of the things that come with that. So not wanting to even sometimes spend time with your dog. I can't be with you because it's too much for me. And that can be really, really hard. So whether you're feeling anxious, depressed, both, anything else, what are the things you would normally do to help yourself with that? So is it seeking support from others? Is it seeking support from your GP or a therapist? What do you need? Do you need herbal remedies? Do you need medication? Do you need support from someone coming in and saying, I'll sit with your dog for the day, you go out and do what you need to do? So there's no laundry list here. We can't be like, oh, do my walk, have my bath, do my herbal remedies. It's what works for you. And you will know from your life so far what really doesn't work and makes you feel worse, and what can help a little bit. So I think focusing in on that is really important to start with. Secondly, we've already spoken about it, but it's important to keep repeating it, because you will keep forgetting it. And that is how normal your experience is, whatever it looks like. Because even though we may hear it the first time, the next time we are lying in bed at 4 a.m. with these images in our head, we feel weird and alone again, and like no one else is experiencing this. So remembering, oh no, actually this is not just me, I think is really, really important as well. So I think they're the two main things, if anything, that I hope people can take away from what we've spoken about today.
Susie asks, do you think that those of us who struggle with severe anxiety and depression are more likely to do this because we feel we need to prepare how to cope with when the time comes? My brain goes into constant overdrive and I struggle to stop constantly going over thoughts.
I don't think that we can kind of group people in terms of what they normally experience, because grief is such an individual process. So just like anything, and I always find this with dogs, you know, so say you live with an anxious dog and you have to go into a situation with them, say like a vet visit or something, and you are dreading it, thinking this is going to be horrendous, la 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 la, and you really build it up in your head. And then you go and your dog actually really surprises you completely. It's a completely not a fine experience, but much better than we think it's going to be. We're like, oh, okay, interesting. So sometimes we think that it's going to be much worse because of the experiences that we've had so far. It may well be still very, very difficult, but actually there's nothing about what you've experienced so far that I think is going to make you do this worse or make it much harder, or that you are creating this in some way. I think it's just a normal process that almost everyone goes through. It may just mean that actually you're better prepared to think about the things that do help you to feel better, so that you can put those into place because you've got experience of what this feels like. Because anyone that knows what anxiety feels like has tried a lot of things to make themselves feel better. So they should have at least a couple of ideas of some things that might potentially help.
Yeah, it's a really good answer. I think it's definitely the case that just because somebody has already experienced some challenges themselves, or you know, they struggle with low mood, means that they're more likely to have anticipatory grief. I think, you know, they say it's very normal. And actually a lot of people that I speak to who are they like to see themselves as being very minded and very in control mentally, and they just try not to think about it. They can't not. So like you say, it's very ingrained in all of us, really. So there's something that Mother Nature has for this, potentially, I guess, for us to be like, this is the reality that's coming, and this is what you need to think about and prepare for.
Yeah, absolutely. And because most of us by a certain age have some experience of loss, like we said before, be that a being, a person, an animal, or an experience or relationship, we know what's coming. So just like if I was to, I don't know, wax my left arm, when I went to wax my right arm, that's going to hurt more. Why? There's no difference in the amount of hair on these arms. It's simply because my brain was like, well, that really hurt. And so now I'm anticipating that this is going to really hurt. And so it's a weird psychological phenomenon that this was going to hurt much more on that second go. And that's often what's happening with grief. We're like, oh my gosh, I do not want to go through that again. Really start feeling that worry and that concern about it. And that's when it can get really intense.
And I've, you know, I think some people feel it so intensely that you know, I've worked with various rescue centres, shelters, where people have surrendered the dog at that time in their life, in a very emotional mess, saying, I can't deal with this. And it's very easy to make judgments there, but that just shows the depth for them of that there, you know. And I've got a friend, somebody I know, who runs a hospice for animals in the States, and they get a lot of people who just can't deal with it at the end. And I think even on a human level, even in my own family, actually, when my father passed, we had a family member who just couldn't come and visit him. And it wasn't because they didn't love him, it was the opposite. They just couldn't bring themselves to come. And so I think this just shows how deeply distressing those feelings ahead of grief can be for some people.
Yeah, and it really as well, it makes us think about our own mortality. That's the other thing that's going on for us. No matter how old you are, whether it's a person who's 90 and you're 24, or a dog that's 19, and you know, it shakes us a little bit because we think that could be me. And often this isn't a conscious thing. We're not thinking this and realizing we're thinking it, but it's kind of going on in the background of our brain a little bit. It's kind of like when you're driving along and then you have a near accident and your heart starts going, you think, that could have been it then. Because it's a little brush with, oh gosh, I'm actually not as invincible as I always feel like I am. This could be me at some point and will be me at some point. So that's part of what's going on as well for us.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, looking at some of the comments that people shared about their own losses and their own things that they're preparing for, what I really hope from the discussion tonight is that help normalize the conversation, and people can recognize, okay, this is still very uncomfortable, this is still very challenging, still very difficult, but at least I know it's not just me. And I think that's important. And also, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but this is what I'm trying to do with Arthur at the moment, because I think we're going to have to think about things in the new year, about what we're going to do. Not necessarily we're going to say goodbye to him at that point, but we've got a lot of big things coming up, and he's an old boy. He's an old boy anyway. I just, this is my own thing. This is like, I love how you've had a big theme going through today, that everybody's approach, everybody's experiences is important for that being that their own. But it is a bit of a cliche, this thing about trying to celebrate how our loved ones lived and not focus too much on how they died. And that takes a bit of doing, I know, but that's what I'm definitely doing with Arthur at the moment. And some of the things that we've discussed today, some of the things that Kieran has said as well, we've done by planning ahead and thinking about the practical side of things when we're in that brain to do that. Because when you're in the emotional stuff, that's not the time to be doing it. It has taken some pressure off, and I think it's just recognizing the inevitability for all of us. I think what comes, and not allowing ourselves not to recognize the joy of the living. Yeah,
absolutely. It's that thing, isn't it, that we all kind of bustle through life all the time. bustle, and then something like this happens and we get that kind of shocked back into, again, a bit of a cliche, but what's really important here, what really matters. And our dogs do matter, and they are important to us, and that's why it's so hard, that's why it's so difficult. I think what's really important is a little bit of forgiveness too, especially if you live with a dog for whom you've not always had the best relationship, or things have been really hard sometimes, and you might feel regret for some of the ways that you've reacted, or whatever has happened in the past. It is in the past now, so now's the time to be like, okay, they've forgiven me. I need to forgive myself, so that we can actually enjoy what we've got now, rather than worrying about everything that's past.
That's important. And also, there's quite a few comments in the group about feeling the relief of knowing that they're not odd for feeling so deeply about an animal, and how difficult it is, like you said earlier, when others around you think, well, it's just a dog, it's just a cat, and I think it's important that we allow ourselves to recognize how important that depth of love is for us in that relationship. And I think that's an important part of it, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that I am experiencing at the moment with one of my dogs. And that is the thing that I've almost tried to focus on more than anything. I tell her I love her all the time anyway, but I'm doing it more. I'm spending, when I kind of sit with her and just kind of give her a cuddle or stroke her, I'm trying to focus on that, like our relationship, the love that we have for each other, the mutual love, rather than what's to come. So it's a balancing act. Sometimes you have to allow yourself space to feel those grieving feelings, and then other times you're in a better space and you're able to just enjoy that moment with your dog. So she really likes watching Harry Potter, nothing else, exclusively Harry Potter. I think it's the way things fly across the screen, I don't know. So we sat and watched the Harry Potter the other day in bed, just me and her, none of the others, everyone else was in another room, and that was really lovely. So little things like that, I think, can make a difference.
They do, don't they? Do you know, I love that, because Arthur's two favorite things is rolling in fox poo.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, when he was younger, it was like, flipping hell, wait till I get you home kind of thing. But we were in the woods recently, and he came out of the bushes, real big grin on his face, head to toe. We celebrate that now. We think, yeah, great, you go and find some fox poo, mate. Yeah. And he loves shredding stuff. He's not a swallower, thankfully, but he loves shredding stuff. And this was last Christmas, but I made the mistake of wrapping all of Kieran's presents up with nice kind of paper tissue, you know, all very kind of artsy. And that was a mistake because I'd literally had my back turned for half an hour, and suddenly all of his presents were unwrapped, and Arthur was happy as Larry with ripping and shredding. And I think allowing ourselves to enjoy that and not feeling guilty about having a smile about it on our face when we think about it, you know, I think it's important. We've got another question here. In the past, I've experienced the sadness and pre-mourning that has come with having senior dogs, ill dogs or elderly dogs, and it hurts. Now I have a new mourning challenge. From the time I adopted her at 10 weeks old, I've known that my current dog, now 2, has a double marker mutation for degenerative myopathy. While there's no certainty she'll get this awful illness or die from it, the sadness and worry are like a lump of lead whenever we train, play, and so on. Any advice for lightening this mood?
Yeah, it's really hard. And it's what we were saying earlier, isn't it? That it's not always death. It can be illness, and it can be like illness that hasn't even happened yet. So there's a whole scope of things that we can experience here. I think the acknowledging what you've said today and saying this is how it feels, a lump of lead is a really good description for it, because where it sits in your body, again, is a little bit different for everyone. So for me, it sits in my chest, like right in the center of my chest. Some people feel it in their throat, some in their stomach, some in their head, all different places up and down the body where we feel almost the body's expression of how we're feeling inside our heads. So I think everything we've said today applies here again, finding safe spaces to talk about it, to express it, looking, like you were saying, Andy, for the things that you can control as well. So really getting your head around, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to happen. However, I'm going to dedicate this 5-minute play session to being totally present with my dog. And what you need to do to be able to get there, again, is going to be quite individual. So for me, my brain wants to flit off every 2 seconds. It wants to go and think about something else, usually something anxiety focused for me personally. So I do grounding techniques when I'm in a play session with my dog, because I want to be able to devote myself fully to them. So for example, when I was playing with my border collie earlier and my mind was quite busy, I just had a cube of ice in my left hand, and I was playing tug with her with my right. And every time my mind started to go away from what I was doing, I would just squeeze that ice a little bit, and it just brought me back into the moment, and I was able to reconnect with her. So sometimes it's less about the emotions and something really physical that can ground you in the present when you need to be present with your dog, so that not everything is tainted by this anticipatory grief that we're experiencing.
Yeah, some great. I love this thing about finding ways to get a bit more grounded and in the moment. And actually, that's one of the big gifts that dogs give us, actually, because they'll allow us that if we have that connection, you know, in the moment with them. And something I was going to say a moment ago, actually, was just because others around us might not get what we're experiencing, we shouldn't take away from, as we were saying, about the depth of it for us. And that includes feeling that if you need to reach out, like you said earlier, you know, to your GP. Don't feel that this isn't worthy or warranting of having talking therapies about, because it totally is. And I think there's a lot of great places that you can reach out to. There is definitely here in the UK anyway, because that's an important part of the process. And it can be hugely helpful to have that talking support with a professional, actually.
For sure. Or if you don't want to go down that route, even a helpline, whatever country you may be in, again, that's anonymous. You never have to see the person. They don't know who you are. They're there to be non-judgmental. So, you know, even if you think, oh gosh, are they going to think people have bigger problems? Who cares? Like, they're there, they've devoted or, you know, given their time to listen. So it's there to be used.
And I know all the big bereavement helplines in the UK, like the Blue Cross and that kind of thing, the people are trained for anticipatory grief as well. So you don't have to wait until after the event. You can totally get in touch beforehand. I think that's important. Yes. And Joanna's just said about Annie's Phoenix Advocacy Centre group, actually, for positive trainers. So I think you're a trainer. It's such a great group that is there to offer support on anything really, and it's definitely a safe space to actually put your thoughts and feelings in there. The Blue Cross here in the UK, but this is online, so I think you can access it anywhere. They have a bereavement support Facebook group, which I'm a member of, and people are posting there quite regularly actually about, my dog's just been diagnosed with this, or I'm really struggling because my dog's getting older and I'm worried about things. And so there's a lot of good resources in there. Okay, good. Well, thank you for those that shared their own experiences, and hopefully it's helped a little bit today to go over these things. And I think it does give us the opportunity. This is what I'm finding with Arthur anyway. If we have these kind of conversations and we hear about some of these resources and some of these things to consider, that we can get back to living again. I think that's really important part of this for me. Thank you, Holly. It's been a really powerful conversation, and it's got me thinking a lot about my own situation. So thank you for your time, Stephen. Where can people find more Holly?
So my website is pawsupdogs.com, and my Facebook group is probably the other good place. So it's Kindness is Essential, Not Optional Dog Training Support.
Kindness is essential, everybody. I like that. My late mother had a saying, no absolutes but kindness. And I think that's it's a good place to be. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in this evening, and thank you, Holly. You're the best person that I know really to talk about these type of topics, and I know that people can reach out to you through your group and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So next Friday is the last Facebook Live in the group, everybody. It's a big one. It's a celebratory one because it's all about all things ACE, Holly. How about that? So it's a big Christmas tree. So please bring your festive jumpers, everybody, and your reindeer antlers or whatever it is you want to do to get into the Christmas spirit. As we've got Sarah Fisher, Matt Donovan, and Chloe Scoons all going to be talking about ACE. It's going to be a longer session than normal. So we're going to have a chat, and going to hear Sarah and Chloe and Matt talk about things, but also get people contributing from the room. So it's probably going to be a good couple of hours, hopefully, and we can good way to finish off. Also, to let everybody know, I am going to pause the group over the festive period. I normally keep it ticking along, but I'm going to have a bit of a rest, Holly. I thought I might just not have social media for a bit. How about that? That might be quite nice. So I will be pausing it. That means the group is still here and people can still look at stuff and they can still read things. It just means that, nothing else will be going on much in that. But yeah, see you next Friday. Thank you so much, Holly. I look forward to having you back in the group again in the near future.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.